The White House says President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have agreed that aid deliveries will continue into Gaza. Another aid convoy crossed from Egypt in the last few hours. It's the third convoy in as many days. On Sunday, a convoy of 14 trucks entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing, but the United Nations says at least 100 trucks daily need to enter to meet the basic needs of civilians. For more on the agreement to let aid into Gaza, I spoke to DW's Fanny Fatshar in Jerusalem.
Well, we understand that in that phone conversation between U.S. President Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, there is this affirmation, yes, more aid needs to come into Gaza Strip. There must be a continued flow of aid into Gaza. But from here on, everything actually is becoming blurry. There's no detail whatsoever, just how much aid, how often that aid is going to be delivered, but also what kind of aid, because as we have just heard in that report, fuel is desperately needed to make sure that things actually work on some level in Gaza Strip. I'm talking about generators that need power in hospitals. I'm talking about simply baking bread. I'm talking about the water system. And all of these things cannot operate or continue to operate if there's no fuel in Gaza Strip. Now, as there is this affirmation, and we just do not know because it's a verbal affirmation, just whether it's going to be a long-term agreement even, it is completely unclear just how things are going to go on from here when it really comes to the dire situation on a huge scale for ordinary citizens in Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, what I'm hearing here in Jerusalem, increasingly voices both by some families of those people who are being held captive, but also by the right political spectrum here in Israel. People are calling for a stop of aid going into Gaza Strip because they say the hostages need to be freed first. Concern is being expressed there. If aid is coming in, then will the Hamas militants actually release the hostages? So it's a very much multifaceted situation here. And I have to underline, as the situation is deteriorating inside Gaza Strip.
Fanny, the Israeli military say that they again conducted localized raids into Gaza. A full-scale ground operation is expected to follow. What are Israeli authorities saying now about the next phase of the war?
First of all, this is not the first local raid that's been carried out by the Israeli forces, but it's actually the first time we're hearing that allegedly one Israeli soldier has been killed in that local raid that was meant to locate basically where the hostages may be, so gather intelligence there, but also gather intelligence on where the Hamas militants have their main bases, their main operational command centers. And as I'm talking about this one person allegedly being killed, it also indicates that if there is a ground offensive, one has to understand there's going to be casualties on a massive level on all sides. And I really want to underline here all sides, because it's the ordinary citizens, the people there caught up in between all of this, that are going to face that massive escalation that's likely to happen very soon. Everything is pointing towards that ground offensive to start very soon. And the question just really is how that's going to play out, because one has to understand that certainly the Hamas militants are preparing that battleground. They have the advantage over the fact that they know their tunnel systems. They know that area very well, while Israel is very strong with airstrikes. In fact, there have been hundreds of airstrikes since October 7th, since Hamas militants here in Israel have killed hundreds and hundreds of people. And again, civilians are having to bear the brunt of those attacks. So when that ground offensive is going to start, I cannot say, because there have been various momentum building up over the course of the past 2 weeks. Right now, we're hearing once again that airstrikes are going to be intensified. In fact, there are massive airstrikes already by Israel on Gaza Strip before that likely ground offensive is going to take place. When, we do not know. What we are hearing, though, once it takes place, it may take 4 months.
Fanny, thank you very much. DW's Fanny Fatshar there in Jerusalem. Journalist Karim El-Gohari is covering the story from Egypt's capital, Cairo. Karim, we know that some aid convoys have now crossed from Egypt into Gaza, but we understand at least one convoy has been held up. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there is always a wrangling about the procedure, about what can be brought in, what cannot be brought in. Of course, the biggest topic here is the issue of fuel. Until now, the only thing allowed in is medicine, is drinking water, and medicine and drinking water. And so the biggest issue is fuel. And that's something that's going on in the background. Everyone, the UN, the Egyptians, everyone is asking for fuel because it's essential for the hospitals in Gaza to run. It's essential for the entire water system in Gaza runs on fuel. For example, the water pumps, normal people need 100 liters a day for their daily needs of water, from drinking, washing, sanitation. Right now, the people in Gaza have 3 liters a day. So it shows you how desperate the situation is. It's so desperate by now, also in the south of the Gaza Strip, that we have reports that first people are really giving up and going back to their houses in the northern Gaza Strip, which is, of course, under the threat to be part of the ground incursion once it starts.
So some aid is getting through, starting to trickle into Gaza. Is it clear, Karim, how the aid is being distributed once it does enter Gaza?
Well, first thing you need to know, this is an active war zone. So we are talking about delivering aid in a time when the Israeli Air Force is intensifying, and the tanks outside is intensifying their shelling of the Gaza Strip. So that in itself is an extremely difficult logistic issue. It is all organized by the UN and by the Red Cross in the Gaza Strip. They have distribution centers set up. And of course, one of the things Israel wanted to have always guarantees that this is not ending up in the hands of Hamas. But after all, we're talking here about drinking water, we're talking about food, and we're talking about medicine.
Now, there are people who are living in desperate circumstances, as you've described, and they've left from northern Gaza to the south. Some, I suppose, are hoping to leave Gaza entirely. Have any been able to leave Gaza and cross into Egypt?
No, that until now is not the case. Of course, the first ones which would be able to leave are the ones who are holding a foreign national passport. That was originally, like in the discussions that were going on since days between Egypt, the UN, and Israel and Hamas, linked to the delivery of aid. But until now, there are no Palestinians or no people with a foreign passport who were able to leave the Gaza Strip.
Karim, thank you very much for now. That was journalist Karim El-Gohari in Cairo.
You're welcome.
Let's cross over to Shaina Low now. She's a spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council, and she joins us from Jerusalem. Shaina, the UN says around 100 trucks are needed daily to cover everyone's needs in Gaza, trucks full of aid supplies, and only a fraction of that is actually being allowed through. How is it decided who gets the little aid that does get through to Gaza?
My understanding is that the UN is coordinating the distribution of aid and are figuring out who needs it the most and how to get it to them. One important thing to note, though, is that aid has not been able to be delivered to northern Gaza, where there still are people living, either because they chose not to or were unable to flee after Israel told them to about 10 days ago. So those people who are in dire need of aid and assistance in Gaza City and northern Gaza have been unable to receive it. I know for a fact that one of our colleagues stuck in Gaza City, it took him all day yesterday just to find some bread and a gallon of water for his family. So the aid is being distributed to those who are in need in the south, but those in the north are still unable to get any assistance.
Among the things that have not been allowed into Gaza in those aid shipments is fuel. Tell us why fuel is so badly needed and why delivering it is such a problem.
Fuel is essential for everything in Gaza right now. Gaza has been under a blackout for over 10 days. This means that there's no electricity network set up, which means that people are reliant on on generators in order to run anything from a bakery's oven to a generator needed to pump water from the pipes. So fuel is essential, and I shouldn't forget, it's also needed to operate the hospitals, and there are over 10,000 people, 15,000 people in need of, who have been injured and in need of medical assistance. And so my understanding is that UNRWA believes that they only have about 3 days worth of fuel left to operate hospitals and to provide assistance to people in need.
We know that Israeli airstrikes are continuing, that Israel is preparing for a ground operation. How dangerous is the situation for your colleagues on the ground in Gaza?
The situation is completely unsafe anywhere in Gaza. Most of NRC staff has evacuated or fled from northern Gaza to the south, and yet they still aren't safe from ongoing bombardments. Last week, one of our colleagues lost her young son, her only child, in an airstrike in Rafah. Just this morning, my colleague Yusuf told me that his nephew had been killed, a one-year-old baby boy had been killed as a result of an airstrike in Rafah. So we're seeing that in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, in places that people had fled, hoping that at least there would be some degree of safety, it's just completely unsafe. Every day, we are crossing our fingers, hoping that our head count of staff will be complete, but it takes hours and hours just to ensure that our staff is all accounted for, and no one is safe.
Israel is stressing that it's targeting Hamas terrorists in Gaza, and that's one reason why they don't want to let aid deliveries through. They're concerned that that aid will end up in the hands of Hamas. How are aid groups ensuring that that does not happen?
You know, aid groups have been working in Gaza for years. NRC has been in Gaza for the last 15 years. And all of these organizations and UN agencies have experience and have developed mechanisms to ensure that there isn't aid diversion and that aid ends up in the hands of civilians who need it most.
Shaina, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Shaina Lowe, spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council, speaking to us from Jerusalem.
Thank you.
And for more, let's now speak with Noor Shawafa, humanitarian policy advisor with Oxfam, joining us today from Beirut. Welcome. The UN is warning that approximately 100 trucks are needed daily to cover everybody's needs in Gaza. It's clear not enough aid is getting in. So at the moment, who is being prioritized?
Yes, well, it's very difficult to look at prioritization of aid at this moment, given that the need in Gaza is extensive. Everybody in Gaza is in need of assistance. And therefore, it's impossible to really look at a specific group of people who will be receiving aid versus other groups. For now, what's happening is that internally displaced persons are being prioritized, and so are people with pre-existing medical conditions and pre-existing vulnerabilities, and people who are currently injured at hospitals. But still, this is not going to be enough. Hundreds of trucks are needed to go into Gaza within a perimeter of a ceasefire in order for us to be able to reach everyone and cover all the needs in Gaza.
And have you been given any sort of security guarantee for aid trucks to go into Gaza?
Without a ceasefire in place, it's impossible to talk about security guarantees. We know that bombardment and airstrikes have been happening across the Gaza Strip, not only in North Gaza, not only in Gaza City, but also in the south, where people have been ordered to evacuate. So there are no guarantees as long as there's no ceasefire in place.
And for the aid that has made it in, is it going to be able to reach people in the north as well? As we've been reporting, Israel is asking people to move to the south of the Gaza Strip.
It's very difficult to talk about aid reaching anywhere in Gaza, given the mass destruction, given the infrastructure that has been destroyed completely in many of the neighborhoods and in many of the routes leading to the north, but also in the south. And without a ceasefire, it is going to be impossible for us to work on the infrastructure that would allow aid to flow everywhere in Gaza.
Thank you so much for joining us on DW. That is Noor Shawaf with Oxfam. Thank you.
Thank you.